Hey,
Hi.
Salam, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, good, good, good. Good to see
Alhamdulillah.
you.
Yes. Let me get set
Here,
up here.
okay, Bismillah.
Bismillah, always.
Have to, you have to.
Yeah.
What's going on? So I'm thinking we should just start with an introduction. Who you
Yeah.
are, what you do, what we're
hmm
gonna talk about today,
Yes.
and Gaza we say.
Absolutely. So my name is Lara. I am a Palestinian American international lawyer. I grew up the daughter of refugees. I was a refugee myself. I was born stateless. This is a common occurrence for Palestinians, and I will explain as we get a little bit further into the live why that is and what that means. I'm based in Paris, and I work in international disputes, and I also dedicate a really large portion of my work to doing human rights focused cases. So, a lot of actually refugee cases. I represent Palestinian and Syrian asylum seekers in their requests for protection before the French jurisdictions. So, and then I do a lot of other human rights focused stuff related to whistleblower rights, prison reform, and things of that nature. But really, my main focus is working to support asylum seekers in France.
Okay, well that's a lot. Yeah, that's intense. You're
Yeah,
solid. You're solid. Lara and I have been friends. We've been Instagram friends how long now?
like
20
over a
years?
year. Yeah.
Yeah, a long time, like 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like I have no concept of time, obviously, because of the pandemic. So,
Yeah.
but definitely, yeah, definitely more than a year. Yeah,
Yeah, we're basically Instagram sisters.
yeah.
So today we're gonna talk about Palestine. We want to talk about everything that's happening. You've got a lot of links. You've studied the issue extensively. You have a background in law. Yo, just get us into it. I'm here to listen. People can ask questions. It's a free flow, but yeah,
Yeah,
Bismillah.
definitely. So you're absolutely right that I've studied the issue. I also lived the issue, right? So my position, my perspective is informed not only by the books that I've studied and the extent to which I've intellectually dedicated myself to this cause, but also based on my personal life experience. So I was born in Kuwait, the daughter of Palestinian refugees. My grandfather was prevented from ever returning back to Gaza, where my family is from, starting in 1955. And so what that meant was that he had to find a new place to live, and he ended up in Kuwait. Now, being in Kuwait, he was not ever eligible to receive Kuwaiti nationality. So, like many of the Palestinians that went to Kuwait following their expulsion from Palestine by the Zionists, they ended up in a country where there was no path to citizenship. So that means you're stateless. That means you don't have a passport. That means it's very difficult to travel because what you end up doing is you end up traveling on, refugee documents, pieces of paper, that are not attached to any state, right? So I was then born in Kuwait, and my family ended up escaping Kuwait in 1991 following the Iraqi invasion. And we went to the only country that was willing to open its doors to us, which was the United States. Obviously, we could not go back to Palestine because the Zionists prevented us from doing so, just like they did with the many millions of Palestinians who were expelled from their homes since the inception of the Zionist state until today. So, if I were to provide a little bit of historical context, the uprisings that we're seeing in Palestine right now, in fact, are not related really to the events that we have seen in the last month. The story does not start 1 month ago, right? The
Mm-hmm.
story starts many decades ago. Palestinians have been fighting a colonial power for the last 74 years, and it is not lost on me that we are doing this live on May 15th, which is the 74-year anniversary to the date of the Palestinian Nakba,
Wow,
right?
subhanallah. Mm.
Exactly. And the Nakba Wafa, if you know, represents for Palestinians the catastrophe. It was the moment in time when Zionist militias, which primarily came from individuals from Europe and that were armed by the British, arrived in Palestine in large numbers, and they expelled the majority of Palestinians from their homes and from their land. So during the Nakba in 1948, 78% of the land of Palestine, the land that you see here on my necklace, that entire thing, right? The entire thing that today we know as Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Well, before 1948, it was just one piece of land, and it was called Palestine. And it had been called Palestine for 4,000 years. If you read Noor Masalah's book, detailing the very deep and rich history of Palestine, you know that the first recorded instance of the name Palestine goes back 4,000 years. So we're an ancient people. And so what did the Zionists do? They arrive in Palestine, they expel 80% of the Palestinian population, and they seize 78% of historic Palestine in order to establish a state on that land for Jewish people only. Now, in doing so, they created the world's largest refugee population. Today, 8 million Palestinians out of the global population of 13 million Palestinians are refugees.
Wow.
Okay, so 1 in 4 refugees, are Palestinian, right? And why are they refugees? Why are they stateless? In most cases until today, unless you're one of the lucky ones like me that managed to get a passport from another country, which I'm, the extreme lucky case, right? I'm like the best case scenario. Most of the Palestinians today, 2021, remain stateless, right? And so the situation that we are dealing with is a country which has prevented those refugees that it expelled from ever coming back. And why is that? Because the state that it established on top of our land was created to accommodate Jewish people only. And which Jewish people, right? People coming from America, people coming from Europe. Today,
the Falashas in Ethiopia.
Exactly, from all over the world, really, right? So today, a Jewish person from Brooklyn can show up in Palestine today, receive immediate Israeli citizenship, receive subsidized housing, get a nice little check, social programs, benefits. A lot of people move to Israel actually for these economic incentives. And that's actually the majority of the Zionists who show up in Israel today are doing so for economic reasons. There are, of course, the ideologically driven Zionists, and those are the ones who believe that they were sent on a mission by God to settle this land and expel all of the native people. That's what we're dealing with since 1948. This campaign of ethnic cleansing really starts, it even starts before 1948, but just to keep things a little bit simpler, I will, start the clock at 1948 because that's really when the mass expulsion begins.
But it is important to note that Theodore Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, died in 1906. And so this idea of establishing a state, and a Jewish state in Palestine, started before World War II. Just people need to know that.
Absolutely. And guess what, Wafa? Not only did it start before World War II, I think the first Zionist Congress was in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe the year after. But at the time that this political ideology starts to circulate, it's considered absolutely insane. Jewish people are not at all on board with this at the beginning of the inception of modern political Zionism. They think it's radical. They think it's crazy. They are happy to live in their countries. They say, we are like I am, I'm Russian. I'm Polish. I don't know what you're talking about. There was no consciousness at that time that, oh no, we all need to go move to Palestine. But he kept writing, and eventually some other people, got on board. And it was very clear from the writings of the early Zionist leaders, whether you look at the journal entries of Theodore Herzl, or you look at his letters that he exchanged with various other individuals, that they had a problem. And the problem is that Palestine was filled with people. Right? So Herzl talked about this, and others that came after him talked about this, and they had to actually contemplate, well, what are we going to do with the natives? Are we going to kick them out? Are we just going to, are we going to drive them out of there? Are we going to just try to, give them some money and incite, give them an incentive to leave? Right? That's what the more casual Zionists were promoting, the idea that, okay, well, we'll just pay them. We'll try to, buy their, buy our way into this land. And of course, there were the more radical factions that were like, no, we're going to drive them out, with guns and bombs. So the movement continues to develop, and it is able to harness external support. And it is the point in time which it is able to get support of the British that really the Zionists are able to execute their plan to expel the natives. And that's exactly what happens. So for those of you who don't know, the history of Palestine right before Zionist colonization begins in 1948 is, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, very well, the British and the French come into the Middle East and they start drawing their maps and they start, cutting up the Middle East, and they, the French
It
say,
was
we'll
like
take.
the Middle Eastern scramble for Africa,
Exactly.
essentially, right? Hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. So, the French say, we'll take this bit of land, which today is Syria and Lebanon. And then the British are like, no, we'll take this bit of land, which today is Palestine and Jordan. And, they start, cutting up the map and drawing these arbitrary borders, which never existed before. And just a quick tangent on that note, my grandfather tells me that when he was a young boy growing up in Gaza, his father, used to take the train from Gaza to Damascus and
Wow.
go to work, right? He would go to
Hmm.
work in Damascus. Like this is like for me, this is like what a liberated Middle East looks like. You know what I mean? No
Oh,
borders,
wow.
just people like freely living. But I mean, we can get into the future later, right? So this is what happens in 1948. The majority of Palestinians are expelled. The ones that remain are dealing with a very difficult situation because now they have been taken over by another foreign occupier, and the Zionists have established their state. They are accepted, but what remains, right? The 22% of Palestine is still Palestinian. The West Bank, and Gaza and East Jerusalem. They took West Jerusalem in 1948. They basically expelled all the Palestinians that were living there. They moved into our houses. Same thing that they did with, the majority of Palestine. But by 1948, we still had East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza. So then what happens? Well, a few decades later, in 1967, Israel militarily occupies the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. And since then, we have had essentially no control over any of our land. So 100% of our land is subject to Israeli control that varies from, okay, you're a Palestinian and you live in what is considered Israel proper. Well, you're going to be treated like a second-class citizen. You're going to have your communities de-developed. You're going to have, there's going to be huge disparity in education. You're going to live in communities that are entirely segregated, and so on and so forth. If you live in the West Bank, you're subject to complete martial law. There's a military presence all the time. We've all seen the images of the checkpoints and the wall and, the Bantustans, the notion that Palestinians are being pushed into smaller and smaller and smaller communities, while Israel continues to transfer its population into the West Bank on occupied land in violation of the Fourth Geneva Conventions. So today there are 650,000 Jewish Israeli settlers that live on Palestinian land in total violation, in total impunity. And nothing has been done to change this. Rather, the US actually continues giving Israel $3.8 billion every year. We are the world's largest funder of Israel, and Israel is the world's largest recipient of US foreign aid. So there is a huge, huge, huge role here for the United States in supporting, protecting, maintaining the colonial presence in the land of Palestine. Okay, so ever since 1967, well, we've never been left alone. And if you just take a look at what respected human rights organizations are saying in 2021, and by the way, Palestinians have been saying this for decades. Human Rights Watch came out with a report a few weeks ago or a few months ago that concluded very clearly, after going through hundreds of pages of evidence, that Israel is guilty of the war crime of apartheid and persecution. And it very clearly lays out step by step all of the reasons, all of the documented factual reasons why Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid. Okay, before that, a few months before that, the leading Israeli human rights organization known as Beit Salem published, again, a hundreds of pages long report which finds what? That between the Mediterranean River to the Jordan Sea, right, from the river to the sea, there is a regime of Jewish supremacy that reigns, okay? Where essentially, if you are Jewish, you have rights, and if you are not, you don't have rights. And this is not an exaggeration. This is actually the way that Israel defines itself on the books. So in 2018, Israel passed what is known as the nation-state law. And the nation-state law, what does it say? It says that only Jewish people have the right of self-determination in the land of Palestine, and that being Jewish essentially is going to be your card to getting rights, and that anyone who is not Jewish doesn't have the right to essentially any of the rights that Jewish people are able to benefit from, like civil rights, political rights, economic rights, and so on and so forth. So essentially, the apartheid regime, the regime of racial entitlement, is codified in the law. And I think this is really a point that I want to emphasize for the viewers, and that is that it's certainly true that all countries practice racial discrimination. There's systemic racial issues in all countries, but very few countries are defined by racial entitlements. And Israel is defined by racial entitlement according to its own law. So it is very easy to see why international organizations like Human Rights Watch and Beit Salem, the own Israeli human rights organization, are very clearly able to say this is a regime of Jewish supremacy. This is apartheid, right? This is apartheid, and we know from looking at our at the past historical example of apartheid, which was the regime of racial separation and segregation and subjugation that existed in South Africa. We know very clearly what it looks like. And of course, there are certain differences with the Palestine example, and scholars have debated these issues. But the one thing that the viewers need to keep in mind is that in both cases, you have a certain ruling class that has rights because they belong to a certain racial group. And those that don't have rights are racialized communities. And so in our case, as Palestinians, we have been racialized and subjugated by the foreign colonizer on our own land. That is the situation that we have. And this isn't just my opinion. There is a growing global consensus that this is the case, even though Palestinians have been saying this for decades, ever since they were first kicked out of their homes in 1948. I just want to add to that. I mean, there's this notion in Palestinian culture. You hear it from every Palestinian grandmother. أخذوها مفروشة. It means they took it fully furnished. It means they're living in our houses. It means they sometimes, in some cases, they didn't even change the furniture. You know what I mean? And there are incidents, you can look them up on Google, of Palestinians who are able to go back, just for a vacation, right? And they show up and they see their grandparents' house, and now there's like a Jewish settler family living there. There's like a family from Brooklyn living there in Yafa or Akka or Haifa, right? My great grandmother was born in Yafa. Yafa now is part of Israel, but Yafa existed for many hundreds of years before the creation of the state of Israel. But what the Zionists would like you to think is that the clock starts running in 1948 when Israel is born, and that nothing was happening in Palestine, until then. And that just could not be further from the truth. And on this point, I want to just share a quick anecdote, and that is that I took a 23andMe test to determine what is my cultural background. And the results of that test confirmed that I am 80% Arab near Beirut. So obviously the test is anti-Palestinian and doesn't have a category for Palestinian. But 80% near Beirut, I'm Palestinian because my grandparents,
come on.
You know what I mean? Like all four of my grandparents were born in Gaza. My great-grandparents were from Yafa. Like, I'm Palestinian. Their parents, their grandparents, like, we were there. You know what I mean? So 80% from, Arab near Beirut. Okay, fine. But guess what else I had? I had 11 or 12% what? Greek. Why do I have Greek in me? Not because my family was, in Greece, but because the Greeks were in Palestine. Because the Greeks themselves were in Palestine, right? And they were in Palestine a really long time ago. So this is really key to understand. Palestinians, who are Palestinians? Zionists love to say, oh, the Palestinians don't exist. Oh, they're Jordanian. They can just go to Saudi Arabia. Oh, whatever. these are all lies, because first of all, their earliest leaders, not only did they acknowledge that we exist, but they actually had debates about what to do with us and how to get rid of us, right? But even more than that, I can actually, through DNA, which, I'm not a huge fan of, right? Because that's, that's whatever, it can lead to some dubious and problematic issues, right? But I can, through DNA, show you, scientifically, that I'm Greek. But there's nobody in my family that's Greek. It's just that we were always in the land of Palestine. And Palestine saw many civilizations: the Greeks, the Byzantines, the Mamluks, the Romans, right? The Ottomans. There were so many people in Palestine. And I mean, Palestine is the center of the world, if you think about it, because really we are at the crossroads between Africa and Asia and Europe. Like, we are in the center, and this is really what is so devastating right now, because when you look at the current situation, Gaza right now has been under a naval and land blockade for 15 years that has been imposed by Israel and Egypt. That means nothing goes in, nothing comes out. Why was this land and sea blockade imposed? It was imposed as a form of collective punishment because following Israel's withdrawal of settlers from the Gaza Strip, Ariel Sharon in 2004 comes out and says, "Hey guys, I want to make peace, so I'm gonna take my settlers out of Gaza." Well, in fact, he just moved them to the West Bank. Nobody reported on that. But ever since he did that, Gazans had elections. They voted for Hamas. Jimmy Carter reported on those elections. He confirmed that they were fair and free and extremely organized elections. He wrote about it in his book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, right? But in response to this, Israel goes, no, you're not going to have a democratic election and vote for who you want. And they immediately closed the border of Gaza. And Egypt followed because obviously we have issues in the Middle East as well with authoritarian despots that will collude with Israel. And we have seen that in perfect example with the wave of normalization agreements, right? That we have seen with Bahrain and UAE normalizing relations with Israel. So this is what we are dealing with. And people in Gaza right now, look, I have family in Gaza. Gaza for the last 4 or 5 days has been right now as we speak, Gaza is being shelled mercilessly. And I have video chatted with friends in Gaza. I have spoken to my family in Gaza. They have been on the receiving end of thousands of missiles from Israel. Over 100 people have already been killed in just a few days. And this is, of course,
how many people have died on the Israeli side in the past few days?
I think the number is something. I think it's under 10, but somebody would have to confirm, what that is. But I'm glad you brought that up because,
And I'm not trying to compare numbers, but let's talk about. You keep talking about Hamas rockets.
Yeah.
They don't talk about the fact that they can protect themselves from rockets, and that was funded by the United States. It's actually a Singaporean system that Singapore created. So let's talk about these little rockets that are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, here's the context that is missing, right? It's very easy for a Zionist to say Hamas rockets. It's very easy, right? But the context that is missing is who's up against who. On the one hand, we have the 11th most powerful army in the world, the only nuclear power in the Middle East, a settler colonial entity which has been accused by the most respected human rights organizations of the crime of apartheid and persecution, who has been accused by its own Israeli human rights organization of carrying out a regime of Jewish supremacy, who has dispossessed and ethnically cleansed Palestinians from their homes for 74 years. Ask any Palestinian what the story of their grandparents is. The story of every Palestinian grandparent is that we were in our house, and the Zionists came, they kicked us out, and they moved in. This is just a fact. And you know how you know this? You know this because Palestinians are all over the world, because we are scattered everywhere. I myself did not meet my own grandparents until I was 16 years old, because they were stateless and couldn't travel, and I had been accepted as a political refugee into America, and I had to wait for my green card to be able to go back and get on a plane, right? That's who's on one side. Who's on the other side? A subjugated native population which has been kicked out of its house, kicked out of its land, deprived of its resources, deprived of the ability to grow financially. And I have to add that Palestinians from the perspective of international law, and this is always, always excluded from the conversation about Hamas, have the legal right to resist a colonial power using armed resistance. However, a colonial power has no right to exist. There is no legitimacy for a colonial power to exist, whether under international law or some other framework. There is no legitimacy for apartheid to rule. Actually, it's a war crime, right? So on the one hand, we are talking about this extremely unjust system, which is being perpetrated by Israel and has been for 74 years, which has resulted in the dispossession and expulsion of millions of Palestinians, and Palestinians who are standing up and saying, we want our rights. We want to be equal citizens. We want to be able to go back to our land. We want to be able to go back to our homes, right? This is what we're dealing with. This is the paradigm. There is no moral equivalency between the state that I described and a people who are rising up and demanding their rights. And Wafa, you know very well that in Algeria, after 150 years of French colonialism, the only thing that drove the French out was armed resistance. They weren't going to go away with words.
No.
They weren't going to leave with, you know, with verbal, you know, admonishment.
Not after everything they invested in a land that doesn't belong to them, no.
Exactly. Exactly. I don't know if you can see me.
You're frozen for a second. I think, did you get a call? And then you here you go.
Oh, here we go. I'm back.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. So France wasn't going anywhere.
This brings us to the next issue. This brings us to the issue of everybody's wrong on both sides, and I just wish there was peace. No. And it's like, it's very easy to say. You can say that if you dismiss the refugees, if you dismiss the Nakba, if you dismiss all of that stuff. But people are starting, do you know what I'm saying? People are starting to wake up.
You know why the both sides argument doesn't work? I mean, leaving aside everything that I've just said, if you're still not convinced, the reason why the both sides argument doesn't work is because in 1993, when Palestinians signed, you know, the Oslo agreement with the Israelis, and they said, okay, we concede. The leadership conceded. The people never conceded, right? The leadership said, okay, fine, we accept to have a state on 22% of our historic homeland. We accept that you stole 78% of it. You showed up with guns and bombs. You were trained by the British, right? And you expelled us. You destroyed over 500 Palestinian cities and villages. You covered the land with trees. The Jewish National Fund has planted hundreds of millions of trees to cover up the traces of the Palestinian civilization that existed before it. And they actually brag about this. It's on their website, right? So ever since Oslo, when Palestinians made that concession and they said, okay, fine, we'll accept to be on 22% of our land. What has Israel done in the years since Oslo? It has continued to move Jewish settlers to the land that is supposed to be the physical space for a Palestinian state. Israel is not interested in any sort of an agreement or a resolution with Palestinians because it wants all the land. And I'm not just saying this, Israel says this. This is the official position of Israel. Take a look last summer when they were, you know, talking about, oh, we're going to de jure annex the West Bank. You know what that means? That means we're going to take all the West Bank. That's what that means. And they were talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. And there was a little bit of an international outcry, like, wait a minute, no, two-state solution. Remember, you guys, you know, and they were like, okay, fine, we're not going to do it. But it doesn't matter anyway, because on the ground, the reality is that they control everything. They can go into any Palestinian house at any time. And we're seeing these images coming out of Palestine right now. We are seeing settlers colluding with the army, colluding with the police, colluding with the security forces to kick Palestinians out of their homes. The story of Sheikh Jarrah, I need to be very clear about this because this is one of the incidents that led to this popular uprising. Why is Sheikh Jarrah so important? Why is Sheikh Jarrah so important? Sheikh Jarrah is important because every Palestinian city was Sheikh Jarrah. The settlers are trying to kick Palestinians out of a neighborhood in East Jerusalem because the settlers want all of East Jerusalem, just like they took West Jerusalem. That's what the settlers say. You can look up that video, right? And the family of Muhammad al-Kurd, who is defending his house right now in East Jerusalem, has already been kicked out of his house in what is now Israel in 1948. How many times can you be kicked out of your house by a people who subscribe to an ideology that they were sent by God to expel the natives from the land. Before we say, wait a minute, it's not about both sides. It's not about both sides. Right? So both sidesism doesn't work. You know, this is the thing that I always say to people. Apartheid and settler colonialism and ethnic cleansing are not neutral, right? So you can't put this on the same you know, in the same conversation, in the same moral you know, question as the armed resistance of a people who have no army, who have no navy, who have absolutely nothing but their
No
bodies
passport.
to
What are you
defend
guys
themselves.
talking
They don't even
about?
have a fucking passport. You know what they have though
Right.
with that?
Right.
They have their land deeds. They have their land deeds proving they own the land, but that doesn't take you anywhere in Israeli court.
Right.
Right? They have the keys to their houses that they were expelled from. Look up the photos online, guys, of Palestinian refugees holding their keys, waiting to go back to their houses. This is not just this is not just wishful thinking. Palestinians have the right under international law, leave alone the moral right, to return to their homes. The crazy thing to me, Wafa, is that the people who say both sides, the people who say, you know, Hamas should stop, Israel should stop. Those are the very same people who, if a Zionist showed up to their house tomorrow and said, I'm moving in, take your ass out of this house, and that's putting it nicely, because you know what they did? What they actually did was they showed up with guns and bombs and they raped our women and they killed our men. That's what they actually did. But the very same people who say both sides would never accept to be kicked out of their houses, would never accept this. They would never lay down and die. They would never lay down and just succumb to colonial violence, right? Why would you expect Palestinians to do the same? And the only reason that people expect Palestinians to do the same is because Palestinians have been so systematically dehumanized for decades and decades and decades. And I just want to say one thing, and I'll let you come in with a question or a comment. I always say to people, you want to know who Israel is? You want to know who Israel is? Take a look at who Israel's friends are. You want to know who Palestinians are? Take a look at who our friends are. Israel has always associated itself with known anti-Semites, and yet at the same time, they will accuse people of anti-Semitism in order to quell and crush any critique of what they are doing to Palestinians. Right. Okay, Israel right now is in bed with Bolsonaro, is in bed with Orban of Hungary, who literally said the Holocaust was a good idea. And when questioned about that, an Israeli minister said, yeah, but he's still one of us. What the fuck does that mean? I'm so sorry, I said the F word. I said I wasn't going to say the F word.
Okay.
Right? I'm so sorry. We're going to bleep that out somehow, right?
No, we're just going to leave it as is.
But... So that's the thing. That's who Israel's friends with. Israel's friends with Modi of India. Right? Israel is friends with America, which is the largest settler colony in the world. Right? Who are Palestinians friends with? Palestinians are friends with Malcolm X. Malcolm X, following his visit to Gaza, penned a strongly worded article, you know, in the short time that he lived on Earth. And I am so thankful for that article called Zionist Logic, where he straight up said, their claim to the land is baseless. There is no legitimate reason for the Zionist claim to the land. Whether intellectually, whether morally, whether legally, or whether according to their own religion. That's what Malcolm said. Okay, who else supports Palestinians? Kwame Ture, the entire Black Power movement, Angela Davis, one of the most critical and essential female freedom fighters in American history, and a fierce feminist. Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, all of their descendants, right? That's who supports Palestinians. So if you want, you can choose to be a Zionist. That's fine, no problem, right? You can, but you have to know that that's who you're associating yourself with, and those are your daddies, those are your leaders, those are your heroes. My heroes are Malcolm and Angela. My heroes are Malcolm and Angela. You know what I mean? Like that's who. That's where I get my moral framework. Like that's where I get my moral compass. You know what I mean? That's who inspires me. My inspiration is not people who are going to show up to someone else's land and say, God gave it to me, get out. My inspiration are not people that are, you know, gonna lock up children and subject them to military courts and you know, this form of detention known as administrative detention, where in Israel you can hold a Palestinian, even a child, for 6 months on renewable terms, without due process. None of the substantive or procedural due process safeguards that a democratic society demands are applied to Palestinians. On my podcast, the Palestine Pod, I interviewed a Jewish Israeli anti-Zionist today, but who grew up in a Zionist family and whose father was actually an Israeli war general. Okay? And he shed an insane amount of light about what Israeli society actually looks like. Not only do these people know that they are colonizers, but they actually, in Hebrew, call their urban centers after colonial names. So what do I mean? They have a colonizer's park, they have a settler's road. He said there's a colonizer's park and a settler's road in every city in Israel, right? They know who they are. They know who they are. They know that they are on a land that is not theirs. And that is why they have systematically not only tried to take our land from us, but they have also tried to take our culture from us. They have co-opted our food, our cultural traditions, our dances, our folklore. There's clips of them singing our songs, right?
Wow.
You know what I mean? And it's like, what are you doing, bro? Like, this is the level that this is the context. This is what it means to be a Palestinian. People rarely ask Palestinians, how does it feel to be a Palestinian? What have you actually gone through? And I always tell people, Zionism ruined my life. Zionism ruined my life. Like, this is not, something to be debated. This is not like both sides, it ruined my life. It deprived me of my language. It deprived me of my cultural knowledge. It deprived me of my historical knowledge. It deprived me of the right to physically live in my land, the land where my great-grandmother was born, the land where my grandmother was born, and the land where my parents were born. It deprived me of everything. It deprived me of just at the most simple, basic level of the generational wealth that my family would have accumulated had we not been expelled from our land and made refugees twice. That's what Zionism did to me, and that's what it did to every Palestinian. So when you look at what's happening right now in Palestine, of course Palestinians are rising up. From Gaza to 48, the territory that became Israel, we call it 48, right? From Gaza to 48, to East Jerusalem, to all over the occupied West Bank. Of course we're rising up. Of course you saw Palestinians today and Jordanians, their Jordanian brothers and sisters, march, 15,000 of them, from Jordan towards Palestine. Of course you're seeing that, because we have been subjugated for 74 years.
I see an interesting comment here that says, when people say both sides, it's the same as saying all lives matter.
Look, I think it's an interesting analogy, and I think it's an interesting analogy, and I think there's definitely something there, because why do people say all lives matter, right? Why do people say all lives matter? People say all lives matter in order to reject the serious grievances by Black Americans about how they exist in American society, about the daily violence that they are subjected to, right? About the fact that they are more likely to be killed by the police, than if they were a different skin color, right? So that's what all lives matter is. All lives matter is a weapon to say, no, your grievances are not legitimate. No, it doesn't matter that the police are more likely to kill you. It doesn't matter that 1 in 4 Black men in America is going to be incarcerated. It doesn't matter that Black and white communities use drugs at the exact same rate, but for some reason, many more times Black men are going to be locked up for, nonviolent drug offenses than white men. It doesn't matter, because all lives matter, right? All lives matter is a weapon that is used to crush the very legitimate grievances of hurting Black Americans who have been hurting for hundreds of years, ever since they were kidnapped from their homes, right? Absolutely. They were kidnapped from their homes. And they also were deprived of their identity. They don't know where they're from. They were deprived of their cultural knowledge, their religious knowledge. They were deprived of so much, and they were taken to a land where they were enslaved. And they were enslaved for hundreds of years, right? And then we had Jim Crow, and then we had the civil rights struggle, and they've been struggling for their rights the entire time. And then and then now we're facing, police violence, right? And so it's like, when someone says all lives matter, it's kind of like a shut up. All that happened to you doesn't matter. And so when people say to Palestinians, well, both sides, what you're essentially telling us is that shut up. It doesn't matter that you were made a refugee. It doesn't matter that you were born stateless. It doesn't matter that all of this is because of Zionism. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. You don't matter. It doesn't matter that Gaza has
And I
been
think the
pummeled.
issue, no, you know what, the issue is that it's almost as though acknowledging Palestine, that Palestine even existed, is refusing to admit the fact. It's like us saying that Palestine has the right to exist doesn't mean Jewish people cannot live on that land, because they had lived alongside Palestinians with the Arabs for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
But it's almost like they don't even want to hear the word Palestine. The word itself. I have a friend who's a reggae producer. He came up with a song that called a beat called the Palestine Rhythm, and it couldn't go on iTunes for like 2 years, just because of the name.
Yeah, absolutely. Wafa, this work is very risky, because when you say I'm Palestinian, you are challenging the Zionist narrative, because the Zionist narrative rests on the premise that there was nobody in Palestine, that they showed up, the land was empty, right?
Yeah, land without a people for a people without a land.
How convenient, right? And it's like, no, actually look at photos of Palestine before 1948. The US Library of Congress actually has thousands of them. We were a civilization. We were a civilization. And we are very educated people, right?
So what do they make of the map? When they look at the map and they see that Palestine existed prior, do they just dismiss that?
No, but see, so the thing is with the Zionists is they're never consistent. So sometimes they'll say that we didn't exist. Other times that they will concede that we exist, and
but you guys lost it. You guys lost it.
But we lost it. You know, sometimes they'll say we sold it, and it's like, well, we've never been paid, so that's kind of awkward.
Right.
Sometimes
the Arabs sold you out.
Sometimes they'll say, well, you know, it's just the Arabs, and sometimes they'll say, well, it's not our fault. It's because the Jews in the Arab world were kicked out, so they had to come here. So it only makes sense that you would leave, right? But all of this is like you know, maneuvering, trying to justify ethnic cleansing. Nothing justifies ethnic cleansing. No injustice justifies ethnic cleansing. That's just not how the world works. You can be subject to injustice and go find a safe haven in another country. There's no problem with that. That's the basis of refugee law. And look, after World War I, Palestine accepted the Armenians with open arms. We have no problem with different cultural communities coming to live in Palestine, as long as they're not trying to replace us. Right? Like, Palestinian scholars have said this, you know, Noura Erakat, legal scholar, brilliant woman, numerous Palestinian scholars have said, if Jewish people wanted to come to Palestine and just live, well, no problem, because there were Palestinian Jews on the land, meaning indigenous Jews, people that had, you know, through generations remained on the land and were on the land. And my grandfather tells me, when he was growing up on Gaza, one side of his house was Palestinian Jews and the other side was Palestinian Christians, and my family's Palestinian Muslim. This is not a religious issue at all. And if people are like still like attached to the notion that, oh, well, actually, if you speak badly about Zionism, then you speak badly about Judaism. Well, let me tell you this. Judaism is a religion which has existed for over 2,000 years. Zionism is a political ideology which was invented less than, you know, about 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You do the math, you know, for practically the entirety of the lifeline of the Jewish faith, Zionism didn't exist. So is the Zionist perception then that every Jew that lived before Zionism isn't a Jew?
Right, because you've got there's different types of Zionists. There's the cultural Zionists, there's the religious Zionists.
That's what they want you to believe, but that's what they want you to believe. That's also not true.
Go on.
That's what they want you to believe, because the thing is this: Zionism is starting to unravel. The myth is starting to be dismantled. These are the words of Miko Peled, a Jewish anti-Zionist and a fierce supporter of Palestinian rights. We did an episode with him, as I mentioned. The myth is that you can be a cultural Zionist. You know, Zionist can be like an identity. It can be, you know, it's like a personality trait. It's like a feeling. It's like I'm just Zionist in my heart. The problem is that Zionism essentially is the belief that Jewish people should come to Palestine and expel Palestinians. So it doesn't really matter what Zionism means to you, because I always say we have to judge Zionism by its consequences. Right. The consequences of the implementation of the Zionist project for the last 74 years has been the creation of the world's largest refugee problem. Now, even beyond that, there was a comment that Theodore Herzl was an atheist. Absolutely. Many Zionists were atheists, and they realized the benefit that cloaking this political movement in religious discourse could yield. And if you watch episode 10 of the Palestine Pod, we interview a Native American scholar, a PhD from the University of Oklahoma, who has spent his entire life studying the connection between the European settler colonial movement that came to America and the Zionists. And what he will tell you, Steve Salaita, is that the Zionists were inspired by the American settler colonists, that there was this ideological connection between them, that they realized the power that they could unleash if they were to cloak their political ideology in a religious discourse. This is why you have many Zionists that are in fact not even Jewish. They are atheists. They may come from Jewish backgrounds, but they themselves are atheists. So they're not doing this for a religious reason. That is also why you have many millions of Christian Zionists in the United States, the evangelicals, right? The biggest group of Zionists in the United States are not Jewish people at all, but they are in fact Christians who believe that by supporting the establishment of the creation, the establishment of the state of Israel, that they are able to inspire the second coming of Jesus. That they are able to get us a little bit closer to Judgment Day.
Right, I forgot about those guys. Yeah.
And let's take it a little bit further. What about all those fierce anti-Zionist Jews? What do you do with them?
Right.
The Zionists say they're just self-hating Jews. I'm sorry, that's just not a good enough analysis. That's just not going to work. Because these people are scholars. They have dedicated their life to understanding where this ideology came from. People like Rabbi Shapiro, he wrote The Empty Wagon. The book is this thick. The footnotes are thousands. Okay? An Orthodox Jewish rabbi out of New York. Everybody go Google this guy. Buy his book. Read it. You have secular Jewish anti-Zionists. You have Orthodox Jewish anti-Zionists. You have people in between that are Jewish anti-Zionists. What do you do with all those people who are saying, whoa, this is not our religion? Being a Jew means following the laws that are subscribed in the Torah. Look, Wafa, when people talk to me about this and they regurgitate this, Zionist propaganda that they have unfortunately been fed for decades. So I understand the confusion because Zionists like to make it confusing. Because if it's confusing, then, you can't have an opinion about it. But when I deal with these people, I always tell them, it's not that complicated, right? It's not that complicated. If you have to invent an ideology that gives you a claim to the land because you say God gave it to you, I would be wary of that ideology, right? You know what I mean? It just doesn't sound right. Now, also, look, I give this example a lot because I think it's pertinent, right? Islam, a religion that has, we're 1,400 years in, right? Yeah. And a few years ago, ISIS showed up and they were like, actually, we're the real Muslims. And we're like, what are you talking about? We have no idea. We have no idea who you guys are. Like, you have nothing to do with Islam. You don't even read the Quran. You don't follow any of the rules. You don't follow any of the rules of our faith. These are who Zionists are. Zionists are people who don't follow the rules of the Jewish faith. Most Zionists are secular in Israel today, right? Yeah. Most of them are secular today. And they want you to believe that just by subscribing to this political ideology, which calls for ethnic cleansing, and we are seeing the scenes out of Palestine. With that, the scenes are just, I mean, there are Zionists in the street hunting Palestinians. My stories are filled with them. There was an actual lynching of a Palestinian. They are setting
the one in the
fire.
car, the guy in the car.
They are setting fire. Yes, and they are setting fire to Palestinian.
Somebody was Israeli though. Is that true? I know it's off topic.
That was a different.
Oh God! So they're going at it. They're destroying Palestinian stores and properties and businesses.
I think 7 Palestinians were killed today in the occupied West Bank, right? Because the settlers are out hunting. In 48, I have friends in 48 that are messaging me, Lara, the Zionists are walking around marking the Palestinian houses with numbers to label them and say, okay, this house has 4 people in it, so that when they come around next time, they make sure that, I can only imagine.
That sounds like what the Crusades did.
They're hunting
to the Jews and the Muslims.
Look at the videos on my stories. Look at the videos on my stories. Don't take my word for it. Go do your own research. Go do your own research. We provide on our website, PalestinePod.com, under every episode that we have ever done, we either link to a scholarly article or a newspaper article or a YouTube video or a book.
Take me to media coverage.
Yes.
Let's talk about the shift in media coverage. I know you
Yeah.
posted about this. Let's
Yeah.
talk about how it's shifted because 8 years ago, we couldn't even say free Palestine. There's a topic you couldn't even talk about these things publicly. The political climate was not receiving it. It
Actually,
was not happening.
I will
Yeah.
respond to that question, but I guess somebody was upset that I look Western in the comments, and
Oh yeah, I
actually,
just kicked him off.
that's fine.
I'm a
But
bit of a tyrant. I just kick people
no,
off
no,
for
no,
these little
kick
things.
all the Zionists off. Kick all the Zionists off. That's
I don't know if
fine.
he's a Zionist. I think he's Arab.
Whatever it is, you see, ISIS. You know what I mean? Like we've got our
Yeah,
people that's that are not our people,
yeah,
that claim to be our people, right? So,
right.
if I was going to respond and say, like, you actually haven't been to Palestine, because people in Palestine, like, obviously, like, look like me, but some of them are covered, but some of them are not. Like, that's really weird that you would assume that we would all just be, looking at it in one certain way. Anyway, so the media coverage. Let's talk about the media coverage. There, the mainstream media coverage of this issue has always been difficult and has always been tilted in favor of the Zionist narrative. There are many books that have been written about this, and I will point to one book in particular, but it's just one example. Professor Richard Falk, who is a fierce scholar of international law, Jewish American, wrote a book about the bias in the New York Times coverage of the question of Palestine. And he basically analyzed decades of articles that came out and compared what those articles said with what was actually happening, and was able to demonstrate that the articles were leaving out critical pieces of information or insinuating, for example, trying to cover up, sanitize what was actually taking place. So, for example, Palestinians always die, but Israelis are killed. Things like that. So, usage of certain
Language is everything. They weaponize it.
Language is everything. I do believe that there has been a shift in the public conscience in the last week, and some of it has been propelled by some of the media coverage that we are seeing in the mainstream media. And the post that I made on my page highlighted 3 articles that had been published in the New York Times within a 48-hour time period. One of them calling on the right to return for Palestinian refugees. The other one giving a first-hand example of a Palestinian family living in Gaza under the bombardments and humanizing them for the first time in their life. And the other one by Nicholas Kristof, who generally writes really not great articles, but this time he wrote an article saying what your taxpayers are doing in Israel. And I think that is a really critical point for people to understand. So we're now seeing a shift, in the public discussion on this question. We're now seeing debates. Okay, well, maybe they do have a right to return. Like, maybe if you were kicked out of your house, you'd want to go back too, and maybe we should let them go back, because they're still languishing in refugee camps until today, 2021. Palestinians in Jordan, in Lebanon, they're in refugee camps that were initially constructed for temporary use. And, for now, we're seeing 3 generations of families have been born and raised and lived in these refugee camps. So the fact that these types of discussions are entering the public space is a really good thing. Now, on the other hand, we have also been met with heavy censorship. Censorship. What do I mean by that? Check out the Intercept article that was published today, which spoke about how posts on social media which speak about Zionists are being censored and flagged and removed. My account has been subject to heavy censorship. There are certain posts that I am not able to take from my archives and post in a highlight. They are completely gone. I am not able to share certain videos with followers in direct messages that I have posted, or the live that I did yesterday. There's just no button for it. And I posted a screen recording of myself attempting to do so, but being blocked from doing so without any explanation whatsoever.
So you couldn't post your live?
I couldn't. My live is on my page, but I couldn't share it to, I was able to share it to my story, but I was not able to send it in a DM. Couldn't share it in a DM. And so, there's like little, what they're calling glitches, but these glitches, are only dealing with
so convenient.
Palestine.
Look at the timing.
Right.
Come on.
Right. And only Palestinian activists are complaining about this. And it's not just me. It's like so many Palestinian activists that are blocked. And I mean, look, even just in the comments, hey, I'm blocked. I can't even send messages and videos. All my comments have been removed. My stories were removed too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We are being subject to a heavy campaign of censorship. And of course, this is not anything surprising, because if you look at The Intercept's Glenn Greenwald's coverage of the question of Facebook and how it monitors its posts, and of course, Facebook includes Instagram, you will see that in 2016 and in 2017, The Intercept was already reporting on the fact that Palestinian activists' accounts were being deleted entirely. News media accounts out of Palestine that had hundreds of thousands of followers that were reporting on the daily news in Palestine were removed entirely on Facebook. Yeah. Palestinians were being surveilled on Facebook. And Facebook hired a former Israeli government official to lead its censorship bureau, its censorship department. But of course, they don't call it a censorship,
No.
department. They refer to it as like, I don't even know. They give it some sanitized name, right?
Yeah.
And furthermore, The Intercept also reported around the same time that Instagram and Facebook were actually deleting posts at the request of the Israeli and American governments. Okay?
Huh.
So this is what they were doing in 2016, 2017. Look at what they're doing now when we're in the middle of the biggest uprising in Palestinian history, right? 2016, 2017.
Really? Would you say that this is the biggest uprising in Palestinian history?
Absolutely. Because what you're seeing now is unprecedented. You are seeing Palestinians from Gaza that are connected in struggle with Palestinians from 48, that are connected in struggle with Palestinians from the occupied West Bank, that are connected in struggle with Palestinians like myself in exile, that are working around the clock to resist colonial oppression, And one of the key events that spurred this uprising was the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque by the Israeli army during Ramadan, after it had already closed off Al-Aqsa Mosque to Muslims, Palestinian Muslims, at the beginning of Ramadan, and continued to aggravate and essentially escalate the situation, until the point where the Israeli forces entered it several days in a row, used stun grenades, used sound bombs, used live ammunition. Several Palestinians had their eyes taken out, their fingers blown off, right? There's videos
we've seen people being shot at in the middle of prayer.
Absolutely, absolutely. They destroyed the mosque. And you know what the Israeli propaganda, social media did? They took a picture of a pile of rocks in Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they said the Palestinian terrorists with their rocks, they were just getting ready to throw their rocks on us. And the question is this, my friends: why are you close enough to me to be hit with a rock in the first place? If you can be hit by a rock, you're standing too close.
Right.
You're in my mosque.
Right.
East Jerusalem is occupied under international law. Nobody recognizes Israel's claim to East Jerusalem. Nobody in the world. Only they do, because they believe they were sent by God to colonize. Right?
Wow.
This is what we're dealing with. And so when they entered Al-Aqsa Mosque, and when they fired on worshippers, Gaza said, you have an hour to get out of our mosque. So this is a very clear statement that although Israel has done everything in its power to physically and ideologically separate Palestinians, they have failed. They tried to physically separate us. A Palestinian from Gaza cannot go to the West Bank. A Palestinian from the West Bank can't go to 48. A Palestinian from 48 can't go, they've tried to separate us. A Palestinian in exile may or may not be able to enter, right? I was able to get in one time, but not without being subject to heavy questioning about who I was.
You wouldn't be able to get in right now.
100%, no.
Like next year or in 2 years,
100%.
Once your name is here and you're talking the talk, you're not going. That's why I'm glad I went when I went.
I'm too loud, right? I'm too loud right now. So this is what we're dealing with. Gaza said, you have 1 hour to get out of our mosque. Israel said, no. What if someone is standing in your house, if someone is living in your house, and they're blowing up your mosque? What are you going to do? You're not going to defend yourself? You're going to lay down and take it? And again, this is keeping aside the fact that Palestinians, as an occupied and subjugated people, have the legal right under international law to resist colonial violence with armed resistance. This is absolutely not a question. Okay, this is not controversial point at all. But of course, when you hear the media talk about this, they'll just say Hamas, but they don't actually know what the law is. They don't care about the law. No, they don't care about the law. So this is what we're dealing with.
So what do you think is going to happen?
I don't know. I don't know.
I'm curious.
I don't know, but I think, you know, like, the thing is that we are now seeing a very organized and creative efforts by Palestinians who are standing up and saying, we're going to liberate ourselves. We're going to liberate ourselves. They are leading the way in this global solidarity movement, and they are making connections with other anti-colonial movements. Take a look, for example, at the Black Lives Matter statement in support of Palestinians, which took a clear moral position against settler colonialism. Read the Black Lives Matter statement that they published on their Instagram. They spoke out against settler colonialism. They didn't say both sides, we pray for peace, you know. They didn't engage in any of this, right? They didn't engage in any of this, like, moral laziness, right? No, they said, we stand up against settler colonial violence and we support the Palestinians and their right to resist. That's what Black Lives Matter said. So Palestinians are now leading the way, and all the oppressed peoples of the world are following them. I have been receiving messages of support from Armenians in solidarity with Palestinians, which is especially timely, considering that they, this summer, went through a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. I have seen messages of support from Maori activists, from Native activists. We're seeing Instagram lives every single day, day.
The momentum, someone says the momentum is picking up. It definitely is.
Absolutely. The Instagram lives every single day. I just want to shout out the Palestinians who are on the ground doing this work, who are energized. I am seeing them energized. Even my family in Gaza who is saying, look, you know, Israel made life and death for us the same, because when we're alive, we're not alive. We're not allowed to do anything. They cage us in. 97% of the water is undrinkable, right? Gaza is uninhabitable. The UN has already said it. You know, every scholar in the world has called it the world's largest open air prison. You can't go in, you can't go out. Israel puts Palestinians in Gaza on a calorie restricted diet. That is the official Israeli policy. You know, so for my,
how is the world silent? How is the world silent?
What is their policy? That's not me. That's not what I said. That's what they said. So when I'm watching this, I'm watching these people rise up and say, no, we want our rights. We want to be free. We want to be free. This is a just cause. They know that they are on the right side of history. They know that, right? And they are working tirelessly around the clock to organize. They are bringing in people on different lives. Palestinians from 48. There's a scene from Gaza. There's a Palestinian, you know, in exile. And then they'll bring in a big influencer just so that a bunch of people will flood the live. And they are doing this around the clock. And there's multiple of these lives that are taking place. I have seen lives with 100,000 people in them. This is not happening just like one time. We are shifting the narrative because we are showing the world real, uninterrupted footage from Palestine, from occupied Palestine. And we are reaffirming that Palestine is a just cause, is a cause that has been for decades supported by all oppressed peoples, by peoples of the third world who resist colonial violence, who resist authoritarian regimes, who resist racialized violence, right? So
how do people get involved? How do people get involved? What organizations should they donate to? What knowledge should they seek? Because I think there's
100%. Excellent question. First and foremost, and this is a key point, Palestinians don't want your money because this is not a humanitarian issue. They want political solidarity. They want you to amplify their voices. They want you to support BDS, because BDS was the call that was put out by Palestinian civil society in 2005, following the decision of the International Court of Justice, which in 2004 said that the wall that Israel built on Palestinian land was illegal, and it is 2021 and Israel has yet to dismantle this wall, which its only function is to separate Palestinian families from one another and Palestinian land from one another. And all of the land that has been placed on the side of the wall, which, you know, is on the Israel side, got incorporated into Israel. So again, more land theft, right? Israel is continuing.
BDS. Let's talk about BDS. Let's elaborate.
So
BDS, I don't know what BDS is.
Palestinians since 2005 have been calling on the world to engage in and support BDS. What is BDS? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It is a boycott movement that was inspired by the boycott that led to the fall of apartheid South Africa. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we are again learning from those who support us, right? And if I didn't say it before, I can't remember what I've said already. Israel armed and funded apartheid South Africa. Like, so let's get this straight. That's what they were doing, and we are inspired by the resistance of Black South Africans. Okay, so BDS, very simple. How do you support it? You don't buy Israeli products, but it's a targeted campaign. So what that means is you can go check up lists. There's a UN list, for example, that was published by the United Nations that the Zionists tried for years to prevent the publication of, and that list contains all of, not all of, but many of the companies that are involved, the Israeli companies that are involved in the settlement of the West Bank, which is illegal. So things like booking.com, Airbnb, all you have to do,
Airbnb too?
100%. Airbnb rents out apartments in settlements on stolen land.
I thought they came up with an article saying that they're not going to be renting out.
And then they reversed,
Oh,
it. So
wow.
go check out, type BDS in, check it out. You will see what are the companies that Palestinians are calling on you in very specific targeted campaigns to boycott, right? Puma is another one of them, right? There's plenty. And I've posted, I have a highlight. I'm going to put all my BDS stuff in a highlight on my page. So anyone who's interested in knowing which companies to boycott, you can find it on my page. But the key thing is we are not calling on a boycott of any Israeli company. We are calling on boycotts of companies that are specifically involved in our oppression. So for example, one of the companies that's on the boycott list is Caterpillar, and Caterpillar is an American company that sends bulldozers to Israel. And those bulldozers are used to bulldoze our houses. So Israel, in its campaign of ethnic cleansing, not only has it kicked us out of our houses and in many instances actually taken our houses to live in, but it also demolishes our houses. The Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions has documented the hundreds of thousands of house demolitions of Palestinian homes that has taken place in Palestine due to the Israeli government using Caterpillar bulldozers. So we say, don't work with Caterpillar, don't contract with Caterpillar, don't buy anything from Caterpillar, right? Because they are directly involved in our oppression.
Wow.
So this is what BDS is. BDS is an attempt to use capitalism and use your power as a consumer as a weapon to resist colonial violence, okay? So that's the B of BDS. That's the boycott. You boycott companies that are involved in oppression of Palestinians. The D and the S of BDS, it refers to divestment and sanctions. Call on your politicians, your representatives, to sanction Israel because it is involved in widespread human rights violations. Simple as that. The US knows how to sanction countries that are involved in widespread human rights violations. It has done so on numerous occasions. It did so when Russia decided that the Crimea was theirs and they took it from Ukraine, which again is very similar to what we're dealing with in Palestine because we're dealing with land theft all the time. And Obama imposed sanctions on Russia, no problem, right? So that's the S part, is get involved in the political process and make sure that your representatives know that you don't want $3.8 billion of US taxpayer money to be sent to Israel to violate Palestinian rights. And not only that, but you also would like the US to impose sanctions on Israel for its violation of Palestinian rights. The D of BDS is divestment. It means that any sort of investment, and I think Wafa froze for
You're
a sec.
frozen. Oh, I was going to tell you you're frozen.
I'm not frozen, you're frozen.
Ah, you're back.
So the D of BDS is divestment, and it means that you cut off any investment in any of those companies that are involved in oppression of Palestinians. And this is what Palestinian civil society has called for. BDS has no political affiliation. It is led by the people for the people. And in the same way that we are watching Palestinians rise up to free themselves, we should support what Palestinians are asking us to do. Which is to support BDS. So first and foremost, Palestinians want political engagement. Okay, they want political solidarity. They want you to go to a rally. They want you to pressure your representatives. They want you to, at your university, make sure that you're not involved and you're not investing in, Israeli companies that are involved in our oppression, right? These are things, and you can read about the massive BDS successes that we have had. And by the way, the Zionists are paying attention because they have referred to BDS as the second biggest threat against the apartheid states after Iran.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow. Go on,
Yes.
go on. Tell me a little bit more about how successful it's been.
There
They
have
felt
been
it?
numerous successes. I can't even list them all. We would need another live just about BDS.
Wow.
But you can go on the Electronic Intifada website, and every
Yeah.
year they have a summary article where they basically list the most successful BDS actions of the year, right? So there's too many to even mention. But numerous companies have divested, amounts in the millions, right, from other entities that are involved in oppression of Palestinian human rights. So there's so much to talk about, and it could be the subject of its own live.
Wow.
Yeah.
That puts a smile on my face. That's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Because look, again, the point is this, is that no oppressor is ever going to relinquish power voluntarily.
No.
And
No.
this is why the whole framework of, we engaged in nonviolent resistance. Well, you know what? Palestinians do engage in nonviolent resistance. BDS is a form of nonviolent resistance. The protests that Palestinians have at the wall every week in occupied Palestine to protest the theft of their farmland in places like Bil'in, occupied Bil'in and Na'lin, and all throughout the West Bank, that is nonviolent resistance, right? But the notion that we have to limit our struggle to nonviolent resistance is only a reinforcement of the notion that the only acceptable violence is state violence and colonial violence, right? Why are we talking about Hamas when we're up against the 11th most powerful army in the world, guys?
Right.
Leaving aside the legality of our armed resistance, let's talk about state-sponsored terrorism. Let's talk about state-sponsored violence. That's what's really at issue here.
Wow.
And look, people are rising up all over. Palestinians in exile, the protests, London, New York City, Chicago. There is an energy about this because look, Wafa, I've been involved in this struggle since 2005, since I was 18 years old, and I was radicalized by reading, Edward Said and Noam Chomsky and Norman Finkelstein and some of these, great scholars, and learning from Jewish anti-Zionists and also my Palestinian scholars, right? I've been doing this for, a long time now, the better part of my adult life. And this is different, and what this will lead to, I don't know. Maybe Palestine won't be free next year. Maybe it won't be free in 5 years, but it's going to be free because no colonial power is ever able to sustain the form of governance that it imposes on people and the deprivation of rights that it imposes on people, right? It took Algeria 150 years, but Algeria was free.
Yeah.
We're 74 years in. I got time, baby. I got time. I got nothing but time,
Wow. It reminds me of a quote that I read that I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but it was something along the lines of not being able to use the master's tools to dismantle the master's home.
Absolutely.
Right? You can't. That's not how you do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yes, 100%. If the colonial occupier is insisting that your resistance must be nonviolent, and even if it is nonviolent, they still come with violence, right? We saw this with the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
Right? Even if it is nonviolent, they come with violence at the protests in occupied Palestine, in Bil'in and Na'lin. They come with the tear gas. They come with the rubber bullets that aren't actually rubber at all. They kill people, I have friends who were killed at nonviolent protests in the occupied West Bank.
Wow.
Right? But if the colonizer is insisting that your resistance must be nonviolent, we'll allow you to resist if we even allow that at all, because we know that that's not going to lead to your liberation. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, why would the colonizer accept any form of resistance that would lead to its
downfall?
Its downfall.
No.
Exactly.
Not happening.
Makes no sense. There's a comment that Zionism fucked with the wrong indigenous people. 100%. There's, you know, in Arabic we say Palestini Jabbar, you know. Palestinians are known for their resilience. Palestinians are known for their intelligence. Palestinians are known for their capacity to love and enjoy life. If you actually know who we are. When Israel was bombing us on the first day of our Eid, we were still making our Eid cookies. We were still celebrating with our families as the bombs dropped. And I know this because this is what my family did there. I was on the phone with them. You know what I mean?
Wow. Wow,
And when I
subhanallah.
talk, subhanallah, because you know what, with that, when I talk to them, I'm more traumatized than they are. Wallahi, I'm more traumatized than they are.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember teaching, I was in Nablus. I was teaching English in the West Bank, and Israeli soldiers were dropping sonic booms on us. So I'm like, what is happening? There's a bomb that's going to fall because you're hearing this loud, loud sound. So I just panic in the middle of class. I get under my desk, and the kids are just laughing. They're like, it's fine. It sounds like a bomb's going to drop on you. It won't. Like, they literally, okay, 10-year-old children ran me through the process of what it feels like to have a sonic boom drop on your head.
And I mean, you know, look, we are literally doing this live, and there are hundreds of missiles that are being rained on Gaza right now. And I have friends that work at Shifa Hospital that, you know, I post always from his account in my stories, Joe Gaza 93. He's a nurse at Al Shifa Hospital, one of the only hospitals in Gaza that has been bombed, by the way, numerous times by the Israelis. And he's right now working, you know, the night shift, welcoming in all of the, you know, the wounded and the dead. And he's posting live about it. Get your news from the people who are showing you the firsthand accounts of what it's like to be Palestinian living under this very dark reality. But the people are hopeful because we know that settler colonialism is not sustainable. It's not tenable. It's just not. And the proof is in the pudding, right? Every settler colony has fallen except for Israel, right? And I mean, obviously America is a settler colony, but the difference is that natives are still on the land. They may not be on their land that they originally had, but for Palestinians, we are, you know, the majority of us are excluded. We're either internal refugees or we're outside completely, right? So we are a people that is waiting to go back home. We are people who know we're going to go back home. I know one day, it may not be, you know, it may not be in my lifetime, but it'll be in my child's lifetime that they're going to go and they're going to buy their house in Gaza. They're going to buy the land back, you know, and they're going to move there, or they're going to buy the summer house and they're going to go there, you know, like that's the possibility here. That's the future that we dream of. We dream of being able to go back to the houses that were taken from us. There's a question, will there be another intifada? We are already in another intifada. This is an uprising. Like, if you haven't, if you're still unclear about that, you got to go back and watch the beginning of the live.
Yeah. Wow, what a time to be alive. Subhanallah, subhanallah.
100%.
Yeah, they've got to be insecure about their. You look at the weaponry, you look at the army, you look at everything. To me, it's like you've got to be insecure. Like, the Palestinians never left. They were always there. There was no mass migration of Palestinians. You're obviously doing this because you're insecure and you need to guard your quote unquote home.
Yeah.
You know?
That's the thing, is like, if they didn't have the missiles and if they didn't have the tanks and if they didn't have the nukes, they wouldn't stay in Palestine. They would run away. The only reason they're there is because they are there in an act of aggression. If all of that was taken away, they wouldn't stay. I mean, look what they did in Gaza. They leveled 4 residential buildings, you guys, in the last few days. It looked like a planned demolition. Thousands of Palestinians were made homeless. You know what they did? They went back to the site of the rubble, looking through the rubble for their belongings, and they're just gonna go. You know what I mean? Like, the thing is that the more that you subject the people to oppression, the stronger they become. It's backfiring. You know, the myth is you know, disintegrating before our eyes. You know what I mean?
You're not going to break them. You're not going to break them.
Absolutely. Palestinians will never be broken. Never. Never. Because look, I was talking to my friend Joe in Gaza on my live yesterday. The missiles were nonstop. And I mean, I was shocked because I didn't even, he requested me on the live and I thought he was just going to give me like an update on the situation. I didn't know that there was like live fire, right? And afterwards, you know, I said, hey, are you okay? He's like, yeah, it's really bad. It's still happening, you know? And we start chatting a little bit. And I said, look, Joe, you know, one day I'm going to see you in Gaza and I'm going to make you the best msakhan you've ever had. And he started laughing. This was after the live. And I said, who are these people that when thousands of tons of piles have been raining down on them in a piece of that is more densely populated than Manhattan, still have the human capability to imagine a future where we're sitting around a table and enjoying our national dish.
Right.
A Palestinian in exile and a Palestinian in Gaza are no longer separated by the physical separation that the Zionist entity imposed on us. That's
Thanks to social media.
That's the future that we imagine.
And I think social media is helping in some ways. Yes, they're censoring.
100%.
They can't censor everything. And I think it's created a really, really deep and profound connection between the diaspora and the people in Gaza and in Palestine and occupied Palestine.
I have friends in Palestine, and I have only been once, and most of my friends in Palestine I never met. I just know them through social media. But they're my brothers and sisters. They send me voice notes. They tell me, Lara, this is what happened today. Please tell everyone.
Wow.
You know? They're my brothers and sisters. I feel closer to them than some of my own blood family. You know what I mean?
Of course.
You can't break this bond. You cannot break this bond. And Israel has tried so hard. This is why they separated us for many years. This is why they ideologically try to separate us. They call the Palestinians and 48 Arabs because they try to like sort of separate those Palestinians from the West Bank and the Gazan Palestinians. They don't want them to see them as Palestinian.
Right.
Right?
That's not happening.
It's just, you can't make a people forget who they are.
No. They're gonna have to try really hard to figure out who they are.
Bingo.
Stick to that. Yeah, to try to stick to that fake identity they created for themselves.
Bingo.
Yeah, make us forget who we are.
All of their names are different. Benjamin Netanyahu's name is not Netanyahu. Go Google his real name. It's not his name.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They all changed their names to sound Hebrew, which again also wasn't a language. They had to invent it. Like,
right.
It was something that they had to forge together at the inception of the state because they realized they needed a common language. Yes, there were some Jewish communities that were speaking Yiddish. Yes, there were some Jewish communities, but there was many that were just speaking the language of the place where they were, right? So they had to create this cultural identity. They have to figure out who they are, but we know who we are.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This was amazing. Thank you so much, Lara. I learned so much, man. We got to do this again, actually.
Let's do one about
BDS. We got to do this again.
One about BDS.
About what?
About BDS. Get into the nitty gritty about really what are the campaigns that are active right now and like the ways that people can specifically join those campaigns. There's one against Elbit systems in the UK, for example. So if there's any UK people on here, that's one to keep, a lookout for. And obviously, I have to plug the Palestine Pod because if you enjoyed this live, I am co-host to a podcast called the Palestine. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us.
You can follow Lara and then follow the podcast. So if you don't follow her, just go ahead and do that right now. You can leave the live. I'll also tag you, inshallah.
Perfect. Save this live because I went.
I will.
I mean, I'm not like trying to be like I went off, but I did go off. So I need to.
Good. It was really interesting. Don't worry. I'm gonna save it.
I need to go back and check for get my notes in order because I'm.
I mean, yeah. I'm gonna save it, and it's not a lengthy dua. We're gonna wrap up with a very short dua, which is free Palestine. Free
Palestine, free all oppressed peoples of the world, all colonized peoples, all people who have been subject to racial violence and any other form of oppression. Free all of them. Right? Because justice is the cause of God. God doesn't want you to be kicking people out of their land. God's cause is justice. Justice is respecting human dignity, is respecting human rights. That's what God's cause is.
Who is, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Dignity is divine, man. Don't let anybody take it away from you, man. Dignity comes from God. So this is exactly why we have to protect it.
Ameen. The human being was dignified. The human being was dignified, Wafa. Absolutely. You brought up something so excellent. The human being was dignified. He was a dignified creation of God. So this is hugely important.
It's funny, I was listening to Ustad Ubaidullah Evans, and he was talking about how the reason why Allah loves human beings so much is because he doesn't say that he loves the angels. He doesn't say that he loves anything else, but he says he loves human beings because human beings have the ability to disobey,
Yes.
yet they choose to obey. And I
Yes.
think the quote said something along the lines of, it is beneath God's majesty to
Yes.
to to love something that is forced to obey him.
Yes. That's Dr. Bilal.
Yeah, but it's from another quote.
Oh,
It's from
he got,
another quote. Ubaidullah must have
yeah,
been,
yeah, yeah,
I think
okay.
he's quoting, it
Yeah.
must have been, I don't know who it was, but
Yeah.
I think it's an older scholar.
But that's the thing.
But
Like we have this free will, right? So make your choice. Fall with the empire or
mm,
join the revolution. You know what I mean? Make your choice. You gotta
mm,
know where you stand on this.
yeah, you have to have a stance. At this time in history, right now where we're living, we can't do this. There's problems on both sides.
Oh,
No, 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 no. We're not doing that. No, show me which problems and
right.
state this one and state that one. Now grab them both and weigh them and tell me which is
Yeah.
heavier.
And I just want to say, Wafa, before we get off, I said a lot of things like I didn't even look at my notes, and I usually work off of notes, and I feel like I honestly feel like I was inspired by your presence, and so I just want to thank you for the platform and for the audience.
Alhamdulillah, anytime, 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 every day, man. Inshallah, we find these good deeds in the
Yes.
grave and meet again.
Thank you, Safety. See you soon.
Take care, love. Salam. How do I end a live? I haven't gone on a live in
Oh
so
my God,
long that I
X
don't.
on the
Oh,
save.
I gotta press the X button. I'm like, how do
X
I?
and save.
Don't joke. I haven't been on a live in so long. All right, yeah, man.
Yalla.
Later.